The frigid waters of the North Atlantic crash against the rocky shores of a Scandinavian fjord. A longship returns from a distant raid, its wooden hull scarred by battle. Among the crew, several warriors bear the marks of combat: gashed limbs, arrow wounds, and festering cuts. In a world without modern medicine, these injuries often meant certain death. Yet, the Norse people developed sophisticated methods for treating wounds and combating infection, allowing many to survive what would seem like fatal injuries to modern eyes. Before we begin this journey into the Viking Age, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? It's always fascinating to see our community of history lovers spread across the world. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and enable notifications. Every subscription helps us keep exploring the real stories behind the legends. Now, let's begin. The year is 865 CE, and the great heathen army has just landed on English shores. These Norse warriors faced not only the weapons of their enemies, but also the invisible threat of infection and disease. How did these seafaring people, often portrayed solely as raiders and pillagers, manage to heal their wounded and maintain their fighting force without antibiotics or modern surgical techniques? The answer lies in a sophisticated understanding of natural remedies, practical wound care, and a blend of spiritual and physical healing that modern medicine is only now beginning to fully appreciate. The world of the Viking Age was a harsh one. From the icy fjords of Norway to the fertile plains of Denmark, life in Scandinavia during the 8th to 11th centuries demanded resilience and pragmatism. Before we can understand how Vikings treated their wounded, we must first comprehend the world they inhabited. This was a time before germ theory, before antiseptics, before the scientific understanding of infection. Yet the Norse people had centuries of accumulated knowledge about healing, passed down through generations of healers and recorded in the sagas that would later preserve their culture. Archaeological evidence paints a vivid picture of Viking life, a life where injury was common. Excavations of settlements reveal homes built of timber and stone, offering limited protection from the harsh northern elements. The diet of these northern peoples was surprisingly varied, rich in protein from fish and game, supplemented with grains, vegetables, and fruits when available. This nutritional foundation likely played an important role in their ability to recover from wounds and fight off infections, a strong body being the first line of defense against disease. The northern origins of Viking medicine were deeply rooted in their understanding of the natural world. Unlike the monastic medicine practiced in Christian Europe, which often relied heavily on prayer and religious ritual, Norse healing combined practical treatments with their polytheistic spiritual beliefs. The goddess Air was associated with healing, while the god Odin himself was said to have sacrificed an eye to gain wisdom, including knowledge of healing runes. These spiritual beliefs formed the foundation of their medical practices, but did not prevent them from developing effective treatments based on observation and experience. The sagas tell us that Viking healing was seen as a form of wisdom, not unlike the knowledge needed for shipbuilding or warfare. The healers, often women known as vulva, held respected positions in Norse society. These wise women combined knowledge of herbs with an understanding of the human body gained through generations of practical experience. Men, too, practiced healing arts, particularly for battlefield wounds. The warrior culture of the Vikings meant that knowledge of wound treatment was considered valuable among fighters who might need to treat themselves or their comrades far from home. The technology of Viking healing was surprisingly sophisticated. Archaeological finds have revealed surgical tools including knives, forceps, needles, and probes made from iron, bronze, or bone. These instruments allowed healers to clean wounds, remove foreign objects, and even perform basic surgeries. The Ribe skull, found in Denmark and dating to around 700–800 CE, shows evidence of trepanation, a surgical procedure involving drilling a hole in the skull. Remarkably, the bone shows signs of healing, indicating that the patient survived this invasive procedure. This suggests a level of surgical skill that would have been exceptional for the time. Excavations at Viking settlements have uncovered specialized tools that would have been used specifically for medical purposes. Small tweezers, likely used for removing foreign objects from wounds, have been found in numerous locations. Fine bone needles, capable of creating the delicate stitches needed to close wounds, appear frequently in female graves, suggesting a connection between women and healing practices. Some recovered knives show wear patterns consistent with surgical use rather than everyday cutting, hinting at their specialized medical purpose. The call to treat wounds was an essential aspect of Viking society. As a culture that valued warfare and exploration, injuries were common. The sagas often mention the role of healers, both male and female, who would treat the wounded after battles. These individuals held respected positions in Norse society, their skills considered vital to the community's survival. In the saga of Grettir the Strong, there are references to women skilled in healing who treated wounded warriors. Archaeological evidence supports this, with female graves containing medical implements, suggesting that women often served as healers in Viking communities. The Heimskringla, a collection of sagas about the Norwegian kings compiled by Icelandic poet and historian Snorri Sturluson in the 13th century, contains numerous references to battlefield medicine. In one account, King Harald Hardrada himself is described treating a warrior's wound by making a solution of leeks and herbs, boiling it, and then having the man drink it to determine if the wound had penetrated his intestines. If the smell of leeks emerged from the wound, they would know the intestine had been damaged. This demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of diagnostic techniques, even without modern medical technology. The meeting of wounds and healing plants was where Viking medicine truly excelled. The Norse people had extensive knowledge of medicinal herbs and their properties. Excavations at Viking settlements have uncovered remains of plants known for their antibacterial and healing properties. Yarrow, Achillea millefolium, which contains compounds that help stop bleeding and fight infection, has been found at numerous Viking sites. Plantain leaves, rich in allantoin, were used as wound dressings to draw out infection and promote healing. The antiseptic properties of honey were well known, and it was frequently applied to wounds to prevent infection. The Norse pharmacopoeia was extensive and sophisticated. Archaeological evidence suggests they used angelica with its anti-inflammatory properties, valerian as a sedative for pain relief, and mugwort as an antiseptic. Perhaps most interesting is their use of bog moss, sphagnum, which has remarkable absorbent qualities and natural antibacterial properties. Modern testing has shown that sphagnum moss can absorb up to 20 times its weight in fluid, making it an excellent wound dressing. Additionally, it naturally contains iodine, which helps prevent infection. Evidence suggests that Vikings gathered this moss specifically for medicinal purposes, using it to pack and dress wounds. The cultural shock of Viking medicine comes when we examine their use of molds. Centuries before Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin, Vikings may have been using moldy bread as a poultice for infected wounds. The Bald's Leech Book, an Anglo-Saxon medical text from the 9th century that would have been contemporaneous with Viking settlements in England, describes a remedy for eye infections using a mixture that includes what we now know would have contained penicillin mold. This suggests that knowledge of mold's healing properties might have been shared between Anglo-Saxon and Norse cultures during the Viking Age. Recent laboratory recreations of these ancient remedies have yielded surprising results. In 2015, researchers at the University of Nottingham recreated a 10th century Anglo-Saxon remedy from Bald's Leech Book intended to treat eye infections. The recipe called for garlic, onion, wine, and bile from a cow's stomach, ingredients that would have been available to Viking healers as well. When tested against MRSA, a modern antibiotic-resistant bacterium, the ancient remedy killed 999 out of 1,000 bacterial cells. While not definitively proving that Vikings used identical treatments, it demonstrates that the medicinal knowledge of the era was far more effective than previously thought. The aftermath of battle brought the greatest test of Viking healing knowledge. How did they treat the most common battlefield injuries? For open wounds, the first step was cleaning. The sagas mention wounds being washed with water, sometimes boiled with certain herbs to create an antiseptic solution. Archaeological evidence suggests that garlic, which has natural antibacterial properties, was widely used in Viking settlements and may have been applied to wounds. For deeper injuries, the Vikings practiced cauterization, using heated metal to seal wounds and blood vessels, preventing blood loss, and, unknowingly, killing bacteria through the intense heat. The sagas describe wound treatments in vivid detail. In Egil's saga, there is an account of a warrior whose head is slashed open in battle. The healer examining him probes the wound to remove bone fragments, then stitches the skin closed and applies a poultice of healing herbs. The warrior recovers, though the saga notes, he bore the scar for life. Such detailed descriptions, consistent across multiple sagas written by different authors, suggest these techniques were commonplace and considered effective by the Norse people. For broken bones, Viking healers displayed considerable skill. Archaeological evidence shows healed fractures that were properly set, indicating knowledge of bone-setting techniques. The sagas mention splints made of wood bound tightly around broken limbs to immobilize them during healing. In some cases, complex fractures show signs of sophisticated treatment. A skeleton recovered from a 10th century grave in Norway shows a femur, thigh bone, that had been broken but healed properly aligned, suggesting successful treatment of what would have been a debilitating injury. Without proper setting, such a fracture would typically heal misaligned, leading to lifelong disability. The chronicles and memory of Viking medicine have been preserved in both archaeological evidence and written sources. The Eyrbyggja saga describes a treatment for a head wound. Then Snorri went there and saw the wound, and felt that the skull was fractured. He took a pair of tongs and pulled out the loose pieces of bone that had been driven into the brain. Some pieces had penetrated the membrane of the brain. This detailed description suggests that Norse healers had knowledge of anatomy and understood the dangers of bone fragments in brain injuries. The sagas also provide insight into how Vikings understood the causes of infection. While they lacked the concept of germ theory, they recognized that certain conditions promoted wound corruption. In various sagas, wounds exposed to dirt, seawater, or certain environments are described as more likely to fester. This observational understanding led to practical preventive measures. Fresh wounds were covered quickly, certain substances were avoided, and specific herbs known to prevent corruption were applied promptly after injury. Perhaps the most dramatic medical procedures described in the sagas are amputations. Without modern anesthesia or antiseptics, amputation was extremely dangerous, yet evidence suggests the Vikings performed them when necessary. Archaeological discoveries include skeletons with healed amputation sites, indicating that individuals survived the procedure and lived for years afterward. The sagas mention the use of heated knives for amputation, which would have provided some cauterization to prevent bleeding. They also describe pain management techniques, including alcoholic beverages and certain herbs with sedative properties, that would have made the ordeal somewhat more bearable. The expansion of Viking medicinal knowledge occurred alongside their geographical expansion. As Vikings established settlements across Europe, from Ireland to Russia, they encountered new healing traditions and medicinal plants. This cross-cultural exchange likely enriched their medical practices. The Vikings who settled in Ireland, for instance, would have come into contact with Irish monastic medicine, which had preserved elements of classical Greek and Roman medical knowledge lost elsewhere in Europe. Similarly, those who traveled the rivers of Russia would have encountered Byzantine and Arabic medical traditions. The extensive trade networks established by the Vikings facilitated the exchange not just of goods, but of knowledge. Arabic medical texts had preserved and expanded upon the works of ancient Greek physicians like Hippocrates and Galen, developing sophisticated understandings of anatomy and disease. While there's no direct evidence that Viking healers read these texts, the trade connections between the Norse world and the Islamic world created pathways for medical knowledge to travel. Certain herbs and substances not native to Scandinavia, but found in Viking archaeological contexts, suggest the importation of foreign medicinal ingredients. The Viking voyages to North America, while brief, may have introduced them to entirely new medicinal plants. Studies of the Los Olmedos site in Newfoundland, the only confirmed Viking settlement in North America, have identified local plants with medicinal properties that the Norse explorers might have encountered. Whether they recognized and utilized these new resources remains speculative, but the Viking pattern of practical adaptation suggests they would have been open to new healing substances if their effectiveness could be observed. The end of the Viking era did not mean the end of their medical knowledge. Many of their practical healing methods continued in the Nordic countries, preserved in folk medicine traditions that persisted well into the modern era. In Iceland particularly, where Viking culture remained relatively isolated, traditional remedies continued to be used for centuries. The 13th century manuscript known as the Icelandic Medical Miscellany contains remedies that likely date back to the Viking Age, showing how this knowledge was preserved and transmitted across generations. The gradual Christianization of Scandinavia brought changes to healing practices, but did not eliminate traditional knowledge. Christian monasteries became centers of medical learning, preserving ancient texts and developing their own healing traditions. However, many practical Viking remedies were simply absorbed into this new framework rather than being replaced. Herbs that had been associated with Norse gods were now used in Christian contexts, their efficacy recognized even as their spiritual associations shifted. Archaeological evidence from later medieval Scandinavian monasteries shows a blend of traditional Norse and Christian medical practices. Herb gardens at these monasteries included both plants mentioned in classical medical texts and those with a history of use in Norse medicine. This suggests that practical effectiveness, rather than cultural origin, determined which healing traditions survived. Many remedies first developed by Viking healers thus continued to be used for centuries, their origins gradually forgotten as they became simply traditional medicine. Lessons from the North still resonate in modern medicine. Recent scientific studies have confirmed the effectiveness of many traditional Viking remedies. Research published in 2015 found that a 1,000-year-old remedy from Ball's Leech Book was effective against MRSA, an antibiotic-resistant bacterium that plagues modern hospitals. This ancient biotic combined garlic, wine, and bile salts in a specific way that created a powerful antibacterial compound. Such findings suggest that Viking-era healers had developed sophisticated understanding of how certain ingredients work together synergistically. Modern pharmaceutical research increasingly looks to traditional remedies as starting points for new drug development. The antimicrobial properties of honey, long used by Norse healers, are now being rediscovered for use in modern wound care. Medical-grade honey dressings are currently used in hospitals to treat wounds resistant to other treatments. Similarly, the antibacterial compounds in garlic, another Viking staple, continue to be studied for medical applications. The Viking approach to wound care also foreshadowed aspects of modern trauma medicine. Their practice of thoroughly cleaning wounds, removing foreign objects, debriding dead tissue, and closing the wound with appropriate dressings follows the same basic principles taught in contemporary emergency medicine. Their use of cauterization to stop bleeding anticipated modern hemostatic techniques, though we now have more sophisticated methods of achieving the same goal. Perhaps the most important lesson from Viking medicine is the value of empirical observation and practical experience. Without microscopes to see bacteria or chemistry to isolate active compounds, Norse healers nevertheless developed effective treatments through careful observation of what worked and what didn't. This empirical approach, trying remedies, noting outcomes, and adjusting practices accordingly, forms the foundation of modern evidence-based medicine, though now supported by scientific understanding of why treatments work. The story of Viking medicine reminds us that the path of medical progress is not always linear. Knowledge gained through practical experience can be lost when theoretical frameworks change, only to be rediscovered centuries later. The Norse healers who applied moldy bread to infected wounds had no concept of antibiotics, yet they had recognized an effective treatment that would not be scientifically understood until more than 1,000 years later. As our modern medical system faces challenges like antibiotic resistance and the need for new treatment approaches, the study of historical medical traditions like those of the Vikings offers not just historical curiosity, but potentially valuable insights. By examining these ancient practices through the lens of modern science, we may rediscover effective treatments that were once known but have been forgotten through the centuries. The warriors who sailed the longships across the North Atlantic faced not just the dangers of battle and the perils of the sea, but the invisible threat of infection that followed injury. Their survival depended on the sophisticated healing knowledge developed by their culture, knowledge that combined practical observation, herbal wisdom, surgical skill, and spiritual practice into an effective system of wound care and infection management. Without modern antibiotics or antiseptics, they nevertheless developed approaches that allowed many to survive injuries that would have been fatal in other contexts. As the northern lights dance across the night sky above a Viking settlement, a healer bends over a wounded warrior, applying a poultice of herbs to an infected wound. The mixture contains yarrow to stop bleeding, garlic to fight infection, and honey to seal and protect the injury. In the firelight, ancient wisdom meets practical necessity. The warrior will live to sail again, to raid distant shores, to return home with tales of adventure. In this moment of healing, we see not just the ferocity for which the Vikings are famous, but the practical ingenuity and accumulated wisdom that made their remarkable culture possible.